I call it, oh, what a lovely setting sun. I call it, I don't want this for breakfast. I call it, I call it the transport of very important artworks. I call it anarchy for him and her. I call it my work on other people's business cards. I call it heave ho. I call it they didn't finish. I call it what look like reflections are actually strange animals. I call it somebody else already invented a speaker. I call it if I plant my old work, will it grow into something else? I call it the seeds of doubt and their wayward signs. I call it somebody else's joke that I cannot contribute to. I call it mapping the history of the 3 eyes. I call it the fat man says hello. I call it can't you see I am working. I call it he wrote his name with toy guns. I call it gas, more gas, and some gas besides. I call it Anish Kapoor, but with an eyebrow. I call it the cockeyed canoe that they gave me. I call it it smells like something foreign. I call it I did not get invited to Bruce Naumann's party. I call it a well-camouflaged urban cat. I call it Oranje Boven. I call it the sound of a boring radio station. I call it my neighbour has something similar for in the shower. I call it crocodile conundrum. I call it a storm is coming. Oh, a storm is coming. I call it relinquishing the pious phallus. I call it seashells, seashells on the seashore. I saw a seashell on the seashore. I call it the juxtaposition of colour is not really my thing. I call it dragon fruit are very tasty. I call it looks like a steering wheel. I call it the sound of a lower F on my piano. I call it the rest was left out. I call it they buried the man with the red hair. I call it I have to capture this idea before it will change. I call it, you have to take a stand. I call it, not here. I call it, don't forget to chain your bicycle to something strong. I call it, looking for my public. I call it, the only way out.